Nintendo's newest console has been a very, very, very big success. Nintendo Switch, and we have this here 20 years of Nintendo success. Nintendo's biggest year was obviously during the DS and Wii days. I don't think Nintendo will ever recapitulate that year. Nintendo Switch is forecasted to sell 43 million units in this year. Yeah, but it will. But it will never. Nintendo Switch will never outbeat two consoles at once. But the Nintendo Switch is actually one of Nintendo's most successful consoles, even then, in the company's history of video game consoles as a whole. So yep, here we go. We have the Game Boy, N64. The SNES was kind of fizzing out at the time, and the N64 just came out. The N64 didn't really sell that well, despite all those YouTubers saying how N64 is their childhood. You would think that the N64 sold like 70 to 80 million copies, but it only sold 42 million copies. I was kind of like, really? It only sold 42 million copies, considering that was instrumental to many people's childhoods. You know, especially games like Banjo-Kazooie. You know, the game only sold like 2 million copies. I was like, really? Only 2 million copies? Really? Every YouTuber talked about it again online, essentially. But yep, again, and again, the PlayStation sold 100 million copies. Then we have the Game Boy Advance, which sold 18.5 million copies. You know, GameCube, they didn't really sell too well, only 27 million copies. A lot. I know like a few people who own a GameCube, okay, and a lot of people talk about how like the GameCube's like Nintendo's greatest console, including myself. I was shocked that only sold 21 million copies, but again, that era was the era of the PS2, okay, the era of PS2. The PS2 arguably is still the most outside of PC and PC and mobile, which you don't really count those as consoles. PS2 is the most successful gaming system in the world. I think gaming system in the world. And then we had the era Nintendo dominated the DS and the Wii. The DS was the second best selling console in all of history, and the Wii is still one of the highest selling consoles. Again, all your grandpas and grandmas all bought the Wii. You know, all the old people, bought the Wii. The Wii was kind of a phenomenon. I never really caught on to the Wii, but I never really cared for the Wii that much. But the Wii was a big success, even if you didn't like that or not. Then we had Nintendo's low point, which was the 3DS and Wii U. And yeah, the 3DS was doing pretty well, actually. It wasn't doing as well as the DS or the GBA or Game Boy. It was actually Nintendo's worst selling handheld of all time. Yep, worst selling Nintendo handheld of all time. Which isn't that surprising, considering that not many people really own a 3DS. I own a 3DS, but not many people do own a console. 3DS was kind of pretty. Even when we went to like Disney World, for example, I'm just use that for example. Disney World is the most popular place in the world. I would only get like 2 to 3 street passes. Again, we didn't really bring the 3DS into that, but we only would give 2 to 3 street passes every time we went to Disney. So yeah, that's proof that the 3DS didn't really do too well. Then we have the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch, of course, we can't really say that's Nintendo's worst selling handheld because the Switch is obviously going to outsell the 3DS later on. Probably next year, or probably sell. I wouldn't be surprised if it sells 100 million copies next year. Again, the Switch had a massive sales boost because of the pandemic. The pandemic hit, and the Switch had, massive sales because people were looking for things to do during the pandemic, and the Switch was one of the things. Animal Crossing came out literally at the perfect time. Doom Eternal also came out, but Animal Crossing was the game that really changed millions of lives around the world. And yep, this is 20 years of Nintendo. Nintendo brought the console sales back despite the iPhone resurgence, all that stuff. Again, mobile games, people said that dedicated handheld consoles were doomed. And then Nintendo releases the Nintendo Switch, which is both a handheld and a console. You get both things. It isn't technically a dedicated handheld, but it's both a dedicated console and a handheld. So it's both of them in one. And the Nintendo Switch is gonna outsell the 3DS. It's gonna already outsell the Wii U. It already outsell a lot of those old school Nintendo consoles, the NES, Super Nintendo, N64, and GameCube. But again, the N64 came out in the 90s, so there were much less people in the 90s. I think about like 50 to 80 million less people in America too. There was like 50 or 60, 70 million less people in America than there is today. And yeah, the DS and Wii, and of course the 3DS, Wii U, and Nintendo Switch. So yep, there we go. The 3DS did quite well as well. But yep, it's just the Nintendo Switch now. And yep, that's a Nintendo success. Goodbye.